So let's go ahead and get into it. Reef and wreck fishing. You know, as I just mentioned, there's so much to cover. There's so many different venues here in our region, the Keys, the Gulf, the Bahamas, and the only real consistent factor across all of those venues is that they're different, is that they're inconsistent. And every time you think you've got it figured out, you can go out there and guess what happens? Nothing. You catch nothing, just when you think you're all dialed in, right? Because it changes. There's so many different factors to take into consideration. You know, when you go reef and wreck fishing, you can't wake up in the morning and say, hey, I'm going to go out there today and I'm going to go mangrove snapper fishing. I'm going to target mangrove snapper on some reefs, and that's all that I'm fishing for. Because the truth of the matter is, that's not all that you're going to catch. You don't know what you're going to catch on that day, because there's so many different species that relate to the structure. Why do they relate to the structure? Regardless if it's a reef, regardless if it's a wreck, they relate to the structure because that's where life in the ocean starts, right? Doesn't it? Life in the ocean starts on those reefs. Every species that's out there at some point in their life spends time on those reefs. There's all the juvenile finfish, the crustaceans, the shrimp, the crabs, and of course, what feeds on the shrimp and the crabs? Small little grunts, lobster, okay, the list goes on. And of course, you can follow the food chain all the way up. And that's where the snappers are going to be. That's where the groupers are going to be. That's where the amberjacks are going to be. And if you list all of the species that we find on reefs and wrecks, we're talking dozens of different species. Mangrove snappers, yellowtail snappers, mutton snappers, dogtooth snappers, red snappers, vermilion snappers, red grouper, black grouper, gag grouper, African pompano, amberjacks, lesser amberjacks, banded rudderfish, rainbow runners. It just keeps going and going and going because they all relate to that structure. So while you may have a target species in mind, you've got to be versatile. You've got to be open-minded. You've got to think to yourself and leave that dock prepared and say to yourself, hey, I may not find those yellowtail snapper that I'm looking for. That bite may not turn on, but if I'm not ready for everything else that's going on around me, you know, I may lose some great opportunities. One of the things that I always mention in all of my seminars, and I'm going to mention it again, is how one fish can make a big difference. Can make all of the difference. Am I right? One fish. If you go out and go reef fishing and you have a terrible trip and you catch nothing, and then you drop a big bait to the bottom, and there's a gentleman sitting out front there, you know who you are, and you showed me that picture, that beautiful black grouper that you caught on a wreck in 220 feet. Stand up, you should be proud of it. Okay, he's back there. That one fish changed that guy's whole entire trip, because I'd certainly rather come home with one big mutton snapper in my box than nothing in my box. So it doesn't take much. However, you've got to be ready. You've got to be prepared for anything that's going to come your way. And the neat thing about our area is every day is different. Every single day out on the water is different. The current is different, the wind is different, the water color is different, the water temperature, so many different factors. And fish, especially big, mature, quality fish, they're not dumb. They're not dumb, okay? And they also don't eat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Am I right? Just like people, they don't eat. You know, I like to call these fish, when they are feeding and they're turned on, we call these fish hot. They're hot fish because they're feeding, they're competitive. Anybody can catch a hot fish, drop a bait to the bottom, they're gonna eat it, they're gonna smack it. However, they're only hot for a couple periods during the day. They may turn on for 2 or 3 hours at some point, then they shut off. I'm sure anybody that's experienced reef and wreck fishing knows exactly what I'm talking about. You've got a hot bite and then poop, it shuts off. Or on the flip side, you're not catching anything and then they turn on like a light switch. So there's only certain periods of the day when these fish are gonna eat. I point this out because you may go out today and you may have great conditions, but you don't catch anything. Well, don't give up because, of course, the next time you go, those fish may be hot. They may be feeding and they may be competitive. And what we do as reef and wreck fishermen to turn cold fish into hot fish, what do we usually do? We chum. Okay, we chum, which is a whole art in itself when we use the word chum. And we're going to talk a lot about that. When to chum, how to chum, why to chum, where to chum, and what to chum with, okay? So because again, that in itself is almost an entire seminar. It really is. So one of the things that we're going to do here today as well is we're going to talk a lot about different types of tackle, different rods and reels. Whenever we go reef fishing, I bring a variety of different rods and reels because I'm ready for everything. And depending on what's happening, depending on where I'm fishing, what the conditions are like, that's going to determine which particular outfit or outfits that we turn to and that we fish. Here in our area, who fishes out of Hillsborough and Boca Inlet, right here, by show of hands, okay? Or we'll say from Miami up to Palm Beach. Is it the majority, right, of you guys, okay? From Miami to Palm Beach. So we've got a lot of reef in our area. However, we are also in the most pressured region in the entire state of Florida. You know, they say Florida is the sport fishing capital of the world, and it is, okay? It really is, because there's 987,000 registered boats. Okay, on a Saturday, you fish up and down that reef line. How many boats are there? It's ridiculous, right? It is. The pressure is absolutely incredible. And it's not only the recreational anglers, it's the divers, it's the scuba divers and the snorkelers and the jet skiers and the wave runners and the sailors and the paddle boarders and the kayakers. You know, it's crazy how much pressure is out here. And then on top of that, you also have right outside Fort Lauderdale, you have a big anchorage where all of these big ships are anchored, right? I want you to think about that for a second. You've got a giant freighter, 800 foot long. This guy's right outside Fort Lauderdale and he drops a big anchor that weighs more than your car weighs, okay, to the bottom with a ton of chain. Okay, no rope because these big freighters don't use rope, they use chain. And he sits there sometimes for hours, 6 hours, 12 hours, sometimes overnight, waiting for their turn to enter the harbor, okay? And you might be wondering, what in the world does this have to do with reef fishing? Well, imagine that this freighter is now sitting out there, or sometimes there's 6 freighters, and they've got all of this chain on the bottom. And as that wind and current and tide changes, that freighter is not sitting in the same spot, is he? No, he's completely going in a big circle. And what do you think all of that chain on the bottom of the ocean does? Completely destroys the reef. So we've got areas out here that have been so pressured, not only by anglers, but by the commercial, you know, I don't want to say commercial fishermen, but by the commercial industry, that really we have such a challenging area. So for us to go out, this isn't like the Keys where everything is reef, right? I know there's some people here from the Keys, everything is reef. You couldn't fish the same spot for the rest of your life if you tried. You could fish so many different spots. We don't have that privilege. We've got a select number of wrecks. Some of them are more productive than others. We've got some reef lines here, but it's just patches at best that are exposed. Okay, so we really have to be sharp and really have to be dialed in order to be successful. And even when we are, we're not always going to be successful. Anybody ever go out and catch nothing? Whoever's not raising their hand is full of bull. We've all gone out and had experiences where we didn't catch anything. I don't care what kind of boat you have, what kind of tackle you have, what kind of bait you have, it's fishing. If it was a slam dunk every time, we would all be out there right now. You wouldn't need to sit here and listen to me. Okay? It isn't a slam dunk. You've got to really work hard at it. And you've got to, you know, I like to think, I may take it a little bit too deep sometimes, but you got to think like a fish. You've got to think like a fish if you want to fool them. Listen, anybody can go out there, take a piece of squid, put it on a hook, drop it on a reef, and catch a triggerfish. Right? Doesn't take much skill. Okay, if you can't do that, you might want to take up a different sport altogether. However, to really go out and target quality fish, it is an art, it's a science. And it's not only an art and a science to target these kind of fish, but to land these kind of fish. Because when you hook a big snapper or a big grouper, what is the first thing that fish does? Runs for cover. As soon as he feels the sting of that hook, may it be a mutton snapper, may it be a black grouper, whatever it is, a red grouper, as soon as he feels that hook and that tension, Instinctively, I know what that fish is doing. It's going, something's wrong. Something is very, very wrong, and I need to run for cover. Now, when that happens, that fish doesn't feel that tension, and he doesn't stop, and he doesn't look around and go, you know, there's a nice little cave over there, and there's a nice little ledge over there. He doesn't evaluate what's around him. Instinctively, he just darts right to the bottom to the first type of cover that he can find. And when that happens, we often get rocked up. Rocked up means you get a good bite, you get a good fish on, suddenly the fish has you rocked up, hung up on the bottom. Ever happen to anybody? Okay, we've all gotten rocked up. If you spend enough time reef and wreck fishing, you're going to get rocked up. The very worst thing that you can do is tighten your drag and try and pull that fish out of that hole. What's going to happen? Premature tackle failure. That's what I call it, right? Or zing pow, okay? There's not going to be a happy ending to that fight right there at all. You are going to lose. However, remember what I just said to you a little bit earlier. Maybe I take it a little bit too deep. I don't think so. But fish, what happens is that fish eats your bait. He runs for cover. You get rocked up. The best thing you can do is slack off. Just relax. Pull back that drag. Give that fish plenty of freedom, because you know what that fish is going to do now? He's going to evaluate the situation, and he's going to say, I need to get better cover. I need to go back to my cave or back to my own ledge. And eventually, he's going to come out. He's going to come out from under that ledge or from out of that wreck. He's going to swim out as long as he doesn't feel that tension. Okay, so I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but that's just one example of how smart these fish are. Listen, they didn't get big by being dumb. Right? They didn't get big by being dumb. So when we go reef and wreck fishing, and really when I use the word wreck, that is a reef. It's an artificial reef. You have natural reef formations, which are rock and coral, and ledges and all kinds of outcroppings. And then you have artificial reefs, which could be sunken ships, wrecks. And keep in mind, all of the wooden wrecks are going to outproduce the metal wrecks. So when you are doing research on wreck fishing and you want to determine which wrecks you should punch into your plotter, a lot of times if you do the research, you can do a little background check as to what type of wreck that is. And if it's a wooden wreck, it's going to be more productive than a metal wreck. Okay, keep that in mind. Nevertheless, it's structure. And all of these different fish relate to the structure. All of these different bottom fish, and so do pelagic game fish. Blackfin tuna, king mackerel, wahoo, a lot of different pelagic game fish relate to structure as well, but we're not going to talk about that at all. We're not talking about those pelagic game fish in this particular seminar. We're talking about just the bottom fish, the snappers, the groupers, the amberjacks, etc. So the first thing that we have to decide is, where are we going? Where are we going? Okay, where are we going? We want to go reef fishing. Where are we going? Okay, we've got to know. Somebody said the reef. Okay, well, there's so much reef. There's so many different spots. How do you know, okay, where these spots even are? Well, the first thing that you have to do is, of course, in your chart plotter, in your multifunction display, I use a Furuno TZ touch system, but certainly Raymarine, Garmin, all of these brands that are out there, Simrad, all good quality equipment, really, really user-friendly. But you've got to know how to use your multifunction display. You've got to know how to use your chart plotter. It's useless if it's on your dash and all you know how to do is turn it on and off. Okay, you got to go deeper. You've got to know how to enter waypoints, how to enter coordinates, and how to read all of the information that's on that multifunction display. You have different options. You can purchase chips, SD cards that fit into your machine that reveal a lot of the bottom structure. Reefs, wrecks, public spots. However, the really good spots, they're not public spots, are they? Okay, they're highly guarded secrets. It's hard to get your hands on really good numbers. But if you do enough research, if you come to seminars like this, if you join fishing clubs, you share information with other guys, certainly you can establish a collection of artificial reefs and natural reef locations. I highly suggest that you punch in as many different spots as you possibly can. okay? Deep spots, shallow spots, and everything in between. Because we have something down here in Southeast Florida that there's a lot of parts of the country that they don't have to deal with. And you know what that is? Current. Current. So sometimes we'll go out there and spots that you want to fish in 250, 280, 300 feet, wherever it is, there's so much current, 3 to 4 knots of current, sometimes even more, that you can't effectively fish those deeper spots. So it's nice to have other spots staggered, shallower, that you can jump to. And truthfully, that mutton snapper right there is the largest mutton snapper I've ever caught in this region right here. And it was caught in 30 feet of water. 30 feet of water, just north of Boca. There's some patch reefs, okay? And that's why that fish is sitting right there on the wall. I'm making a point. Do not think that you have to fish in 300 feet of water to catch quality fish, because you don't. Sometimes those fish are shallower, especially this time of the year when it gets windy and rough. Like, you know, when we have this wind, it pushes these snappers shallower and shallower, the groupers as well. So don't discount shallow spots just because they're shallow. The problem is people go and they fish these shallow spots and they're completely, when they hook a fish like this that they're not expecting, what happens? Premature tackle failure. You're undergunned and you lose them. And you thought you got hung on the bottom or one of a million different things, and you never even knew that you just got slammed by a big fish, okay, who schooled you, okay? Well, they're not schooling me. I can tell you that. Well, sometimes I lose, but nevertheless. So again, you've got to have a lot of different spots in different depths, okay, to go to. Some of those are going to be natural wrecks, you know, natural reefs, I should say, and some of them are going to be artificial wrecks. Big question. Do I anchor or do I drift? Okay, do I anchor or do I drift? A lot of different variables there. And you can't make that decision when you leave the dock in the morning. You can't say, okay, I'm going to get in my boat and I'm going to go anchor right on a reef and that's what I'm going to do. Maybe, I mean, it's good to have a plan, but you better be prepared to change that plan. Because again, if you go and you are fishing, for example, I'm just using an example, the reef out here, there's a second reef line, or a reef line, 60 foot of water. And you want to fish that reef for yellowtail snapper, okay? And you're going to fish in the evening or nighttime, great time to go fish the reef for snapper. And you go out there and there is zero current, opposite of what we were talking about earlier, zero current. You stop the boat, you drop the anchor in the water, and the anchor line flops like this. You don't even, what we call, you don't even come tight on the anchor. The boat is just sitting there, okay? That's not really a great scenario for anchoring because you are chumming, and what's happening to all your chum? It's going straight down. You know, you're going to catch that nurse shark sitting on the bottom, okay, who's looking up at you, thanking you for feeding it. You're not going to catch anything. So in a scenario like that, you want to drift. You know, there's not a lot of current. At the very least, you want to move a little, okay? You want to move a little. On the other hand, if you're going to go, for example, the Florida Keys, and you're going to go yellowtail fishing on the reefs in the Florida Keys, and you're going to chum, you want to anchor. Okay, there's some current, you're fishing 30 to 40 foot patch reefs, and you want to anchor because you are trying to bring all of those fish to you. And if you are drifting and just drifting along, yes, sometimes those fish will follow you, but it also depends as to what the conditions are. As an example, if you start off in 30 to 40 feet of water and that wind or the current, whatever the scenario is, pushes you out into deeper water, those yellowtails are not going to follow you. Those mangrove snapper that you have behind the boat during the spawn in July, and you're catching big mangroves down in the Keys, you're chumming like crazy, but you're not on the anchor, and you get blown out off the edge into 200 feet of water, those snappers are not coming out there with you. They're staying over there. Okay, so there are scenarios where you need to anchor and there are scenarios where you need to drift. You've got to be prepared to do both. If there's not a lot of current at all, you can get away with drifting, as I mentioned earlier. However, if you're focused on one particular area, may it be a wreck, may it be a particular depth of water or a particular reef line, anchoring certainly is a great option, especially if you're going to chum heavy. While we're on the subject of anchors, I do want to point out that there is a very big difference in anchors that are out there. Okay, I use a Fortress anchor, and I'll tell you why, because it grabs the first time every time. Okay, and that's a huge factor. This isn't a plug for Fortress. I'm pointing something out. You go out with your buddies, you spend all this time, energy, money, you finally get out there, you want to anchor up, you've got the perfect spot, you drop your anchor and it drags and it doesn't grab. And suddenly you're not where you thought you wanted to be. You know what a lot of guys do? They go, that's okay. That's all right. It's all right. We're good. We'll just fish here. All right. And then you have the other guys who are smarter enough to know that no, that's not okay. We need to be precisely in a perfect position. In order to have successful reef and wreck fishing, we need to have precise positioning, especially when we're anchoring. Because remember, the fish relate to the structure. And if I'm anchored, as an example, here's a wreck right here in 90 feet of water, and I drop my anchor and my boat ends up over there, and the current's going this way. So my anchor's dropped over there, the wreck is right here, and my boat's over there. And I'm chumming. What am I going to catch? Nothing, because all of the fish are where? They're in front of me, right? My chum is flowing that way, way past it. So I'm missing out on, who knows what I'm missing out on, but I know I'm missing out. So in a scenario like that, what I like to do is anchor way up there. I come back, I want the wreck right here, and I'm going to stop over here. I'm going to tie my anchor up and position my boat over here, ahead of the wreck, up current of the wreck. At this point, when I'm chumming, all my chum is flowing over the wreck, right? Makes sense. It's flowing over the wreck. I'm turning those cold fish into hot fish, and they're coming up in the chum slick. Okay, that's the ideal scenario. If I don't catch them over here, I can let out a little bit of line and position myself now directly on top of the wreck if I wanted to. So you can make slight adjustments. However, in order to do that properly, you have to know how to anchor your boat properly. These are the fundamentals of fishing and boating. How do I position my boat, Mike, directly on top of the wreck if I don't even know how to anchor my boat right? So again, we don't have enough time to teach you how to anchor your boat, but you need to know all of these different things in order to be a successful angler and certainly to be a successful reef and wreck fisherman. It all starts with the right gear. Get a good anchor like a Fortress, have plenty of rope and plenty of chain, okay, to make sure that that anchor does grab the bottom, where you want it to grab the bottom. Like I said, make sure you have plenty of line so you can make adjustments and bring that boat back as far as you need to bring it back. You can use your chart plotter. Today's equipment is so simple. They have a little boat icon, which is you. You can position that boat icon directly on top of the wreck icon. Put your boat in neutral and just stop. And just give it 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and you will see a little track behind your boat showing you exactly which way you are drifting. Does this kind of make sense? Okay. Again, very basic, but vital to proper positioning. So make sure that you know how to anchor properly. And at that point, like I said, you can just follow your line back up. You know exactly how you're drifting. Drop that anchor, position yourself ahead of the wreck, start fishing there, and then you can work your way back. And the same applies with reef fishing. If you're going to anchor directly on top of a reef, there are lots of, an example. Just north of Boca, as I mentioned, there are some reef balls. You will see these balls that are permanently mounted to the bottom where you can just pull up to that ball and tie off to it. Okay, so you don't have to drop an anchor on the reef because, of course, we don't want to damage what little coral reef we have left. And if you are in a scenario where you're going to anchor on a reef, certainly you don't want to use a standard type of Fortress anchor, something that's going to get stuck that you may lose. You want to use like a grapnel anchor, something with the big metal arms that could be bent, okay, right out of that reef. And you're not damaging the reef and you're getting your anchor back. So keep that in mind. Certainly important to have these different tools in place. So once we determine where we're going to fish, as I mentioned, it may be deep water, it may be shallower water. It's up to you to determine where you're going and what you're targeting. If you're specifically looking, for example, we'll say amberjack. Here's a hard fighting species that relates to reefs and wrecks. A lot of fun to catch, okay? Not the greatest on the dinner table, but not bad. But a lot of fun to catch. If you're looking for those big amberjacks in the spring, Where are you going to go? You don't want to fish in those 30-foot spots because that's not where those big AJs are going to be. They're going to be out there in nothing less than 200 feet of water. So you are going to want to fish deeper. And in that scenario where you're targeting a fish that relates to the wreck, relates to the structure, but he doesn't hug it, those amberjacks are not in the wreck. They're hovering all around the wreck. They swim around it. Am I going to want to anchor there or drift there? Drift. I'm going to want to cover as much ground as I can because there are scenarios where those fish are on the up current side of the wreck. There are scenarios where there's fish are on the down current side of the wreck. So I want to drift right across it. And you don't have to drift directly over top of the wreck. You can fish the perimeter of the wreck. Right outside, we're fortunate, right outside Hillsborough Inlet, if you are not aware of this, there are a series of artificial wrecks. Okay, they're all clearly marked, they're on charts. Some of them are what we call phantom wrecks or ghost wrecks, meaning you punch in the coordinates, you go out there, you're right on top of the wreck, you look on your fish finder, and guess what's under the boat? Nothing. Okay, it may have been there one day, but it certainly isn't there today. Okay, it may have moved during storms, it may have deteriorated, lots of different things could have happened. In the transition from old Loran technology to GPS technology, the numbers may have gotten mixed up there somewhere. So don't, again, don't count on every single public spot that you see on a chart actually being out there because it's not. But if you punch in enough of them, and go out there and invest the time, you can, locate the wrecks that are out there. And as I mentioned, there's a whole series of them right outside Hillsborough Inlet here, which is another reason. Remember, here off our coast, it gets deep really, really fast, right? Really fast. That's why there's so much pressure. One of the reasons there's so much pressure out here off of our coast is because it gets so deep, so fast, okay, and it's easy to get into deep water, and there's so many boats, et cetera, et cetera. So keep that in mind as well. A lot of these spots too, as I mentioned, are ghost spots. What I did a long time ago, and I recommend you do this as well, pick your area. If you fish out of Boca Inlet, if you fish out of Hillsborough Inlet, whatever inlet you fish out of, okay? Take one day of your life. One day of your life. Punch in a ton of different numbers in your machine. Don't put a single rod on your boat. Not one rod. I know that's going to be hard for you to do. All right? Go out the inlet and just go look and search. Go to all of those different spots and go, okay, here it is. Okay? And I found this spot. This is a good spot. I see where it's at. It's got a lot of profile. Profile is the distance, or relief, I should say, is the proper term. Relief is the distance the wreck comes up off the bottom. Wrecks that have a lot of relief tend to hold a lot of fish. So do the investigative work. You have to do it. You have to put in the time. People said to me, a couple guys earlier are from out of town here, or just moved to South Florida, and they said, this isn't like fishing back home. I'll tell you, this isn't like fishing back home. This is completely different. You're right. This is completely different. It really is. And in order for you to learn it, in order for you to be successful, you've got to put in the time. The more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. If you're not willing to go out there and do these fundamental things and put in the time, what do you think you're going to catch? Have fun catching all those triggerfish. I'll catch the muttons. Okay? Do me a favor. Go. Okay? So, you've got to do it. You really do. It's super, super important. So nevertheless, I'm going out there, and again, you could be, one of the things that we do here that's really popular is yellowtail snapper fishing, right? Okay, really popular yellowtail snapper fishing off of our coast here. Everybody loves yellowtails. You can fish for them during the day. You can fish for them at night. Certainly down in the Keys, you can fish for yellowtails, whatever. The Bahamas, you can catch yellowtails. Dry tortugas, they're everywhere. It's one of the most popular, if not the most popular, reef species. So you're going to go out, and let's assume you're going to fish the reef and you want to anchor up or drift, but we'll say you're going to anchor up and you're going to start to chum. When I use the word chum, you may picture going into a bait freezer at a tackle shop and pulling out a little 5-pound box of frozen chum. And you pull out that box and the guy behind the counter says $19.99, and you're like, what? Okay, and you pay $20 for this little 5 or 7 pound box of chum that lasts you 45 minutes. And you think that's enough chum. That's not enough chum, my friends. I can tell you, if you want to chum, the guys down in the Keys who are really, really specialists at catching yellowtail snapper and mangroves will easily blow through 100 pounds of chum. Easily blow through 100 pounds. So you've got to find that source where you can get a lot of chum. And it's not going to your local tackle shop and buying little 5-pound boxes, because you'll go broke, okay? And there are resources where you can get 25-pound blocks of chum. And that's what you need. You need a lot of chum. You also need chunks. Okay, it's always a good idea to spice up your chum slick with chunks. That could be fresh cut bait, could be all of the bonitas that you catch, and everyone goes, oh, I hate catching bonitas, right? By show of hands, who hates catching bonitas? Okay, nobody? Who loves catching bonitas, okay? Everybody, great, keep catching them, all right? And save them, because I'll tell you what, those bonitas are great chunk baits. Cut them up into small strips, small chunks, okay? When you're out there chumming, every now and then, throw a scoop of those chunks in the water. Silver sides, squid, cut up goggle eye. Right now, of course, the mullet run, load your freezer in mullet. No, not your bait freezer, the freezer in your kitchen. Don't worry about what your wife says, okay? Just load it up with mullet, okay? And cut all of that up, because you need that stuff. You've got to take these fish and really turn them on and feed them and get them going. However, you don't want to overfeed them, because if you overfeed them, what happens is they stay way back in your chum slick and they don't swim up the chum slick to investigate where that source is coming from. So you have to find that balance. How do you determine the balance? Well, it's all based on the current. If you have a lot of current and there's a lot of water flowing, can you chum heavily? Yes. If you don't have a lot of current and the chum is practically just fluttering right to the bottom, do you need to chum like crazy? No. So you have to find that balance based on the conditions that you face when you get out there. You know, we don't have, I don't know about you guys, I certainly don't have a magic little app on my phone that says, Mike, when you go out there tomorrow in 90 feet, there's going to be 2 knots of current. It's going to be sunny, 88 degrees. You know, you don't have that current meter, because it changes so often based on so many different factors. So you've got to be ready. Nevertheless, you went out there, you anchored up, you're in the proper position, you're chumming, you've got some current, you're spicing it up with some chunk slicks every now and then. Now it's time to fish. And don't be in such a rush. Don't think that, hey, I got to get anchored up, and before the anchor hits the bottom, you got a rod in your hand. Before the anchor even hits the bottom, and you're already fishing. What's your rush? Slow down. Slow down. Let the chum do its thing. Okay, if you're in 90 feet of water, if you're in 30 feet of water, that chum needs time to work its magic, to wake everybody up, to get the food chain fired up, okay, to get those fish going, okay, and especially, you know, good quality fish, like I said earlier, they're not dumb, okay, it's gonna take some time to let all of that come together, so don't be in such a rush. So the first thing that we do when we get set up is I'll grab a light rod, little 6.5, 7-foot spinner, nothing fancy, okay? And on this, I have a sabiki rig. A sabiki rig is a multiple hook bait rig. If you're unfamiliar with a sabiki rig, I didn't want to take it out of the package because I didn't want to get a hook in him, and her, okay? But it's a typical sabiki rig. First thing I'm going to do is try and catch bait, because the best bait that you can use on the reef is the bait that lives on the reef. What do you think the fish are eating? What are the fish that are on the reef eating? They're eating the fish that are on the reef. So what do I want to use to catch those fish is their natural prey items, okay, the natural forage. So I'm going to spend some time trying to catch as much fresh bait as I can. And that may mean ballyhoo up on the surface. Ballyhoo will swim into your chum slick. It may mean sometimes goggle eyes or pilchards, anything. At the very least, and one of the best baits is, of course, put a sinker on your sabiki rig, you know, common sense. Bait the little hooks with a little piece of squid or a little piece of fish and drop it straight to the bottom. And catch the little pinfish and the pigfish and the grunts that are right on the bottom, because that's the best bait. Groupers love grunts. Okay, they love grunts. So don't be afraid to fish those baits, and you need to catch them. Catch those baits. That's the first thing that I'm going to do. So make sure that you have a light spinning rod, as I mentioned, with a sabiki, ready to go to catch all of that bait. Because I can tell you that box of sardines that you paid $14.99 for, when you thaw those out and cut them in half and put it on a hook and you drop it to the bottom, 80% of the time the bait falls off the hook because it's so mushy before it even gets to the bottom. Am I right? And then when it does get to the bottom, it gets picked to death and picked off the hook in 2 seconds. It's mush, it's garbage. You've got to fish fresh bait. I can't stress this enough. Fresh bait is firm, it's juicy, it's delicious. Okay, I mean, you got to do it. Okay, and right now, you can get all the fresh bait that you want. Mullet, they're easy to catch. Okay, they really could throw a cast net on them just about everywhere. And as the weeks progress here, they're going to become even easier to catch. So get your hands on as much fresh bait as you can because it's going to make a huge difference in the outcome of your fishing trip. Okay. So next thing I'm going to do is, again, we're yellowtail fishing, we're on a reef, we're on a wreck. We could be down in the Keys, we could be in the Bahamas, we could be right out front here. 90% of the time, you're gonna see this rod in my hand. It's a Chaos rod, 7-foot graphite rod, little light, we'll call it a redfish rod. Okay, it's a redfish rod. It's got a little Daiwa spinner on it, a BG 3000 loaded with 15-pound test braid. Very, very light, okay? Can you do me a favor, ma'am? Can you hold that? Could you fish with that for 8 hours straight and not get tired? Yeah. Very light, very comfortable, okay? On the other hand, you put a heavy outfit in somebody's hands, they tend to put it in the rod holder, they tend to put it down, especially if they're not catching fish, it's uncomfortable, they're fighting the tackle more than they're fighting the fish. Okay, so you've got to take that into consideration because if you're not actively fishing, you're not actively catching. So be comfortable about it. However, and I point this out too, that fish was caught on this rod. Okay, you don't need a giant rod to catch a big fish, but you've got to be prepared properly. First of all, plenty of line capacity. I don't have to worry about that. I know my braid, this is 15-pound diamond braid. It's super strong. You can't break braid. You cannot break braid. The only time that you can break braid is if it's damaged. If one of the filaments or more than one of the filaments are damaged, that line will part and you will have premature tackle failure every time. The line will break. So when somebody says, oh, I was fishing braid and the braid broke. Why? Was it damaged? No, it wasn't damaged. And I go, really? You sure about that? Nope, definitely wasn't damaged. I guarantee you is damaged. And it could be from something as simple as a little nick on the inside of the guide, on the ring. Okay, it could be from something as simple as that. Can just scratch that braid and that braid will break. However, if it is not damaged, as I mentioned earlier, it's not going to break. Your connections, in this particular case, I've got this reel loaded with 15-pound diamond braid. As I mentioned, plenty of line capacity. I have a long fluorocarbon leader, a 20-pound fluorocarbon leader. It's probably 12 to 15 feet long. It is connected to the braid. I'm not sure if you can see this, but with this very small little streamlined knot. It's called an FG knot. There are no swivels. There is no terminal tackle. There's no junk on here because I don't need the junk on here. I want a very streamlined connection, but I want it to be super strong. Again, the FG knot. If you don't know it, learn it. Once you learn it, you'll never use another knot again when it comes to connecting braid to either fluorocarbon or monofilament leader. Long leader, long leader. This is actually a little bit on the short side when I say 12 to 15 feet. Don't be afraid to fish 25 foot. Some of the guys down in the Keys, the master yellowtail fishermen I call them, will fish 100-foot leaders. Because as you're feeding a bait back in the chum slick, remember that a lot of times those bigger fish are back there on the far end of the chum slick. They're hanging way back there. But all of these smaller ones that are in the chunk slick as well and in the chum slick, you could spook those fish with this line. You may look at this thin line and say, it's impossible for that fish to see it. No, it's not. These fish see this line. They see the fluorocarbon, they see the monofilament, they see it all. It is almost impossible to achieve any sort of presentation that's completely stealthy, that the fish can't see at all. So we try and go as low as we can, as light as we possibly can, and as stealthy as we can, but it's a balance, because if we go too light, zing pow, we lose those fish every time. So in this particular case, just a very light outfit. I've got the outfit finished off with a jig head. There's not a hook, it's just a jig head. Okay, these jig heads are made by 10,000 different companies. They come in 10,000 different colors, sizes, shapes, but it's just a jig head. This is really easy to fish. I've got this jig head. This is a 1/4 ounce jig head tied on with a little loop knot just to give it maximum action. I could fish a number of different baits on this jig head. A strip bait is killer. A little thin strip of fresh bonita. Remember all the bonitas that everybody loves catching? Okay, they make great strip baits. A mullet strip, anything. Don't put that mushy sardine that we were talking about on here, because it's going to, completely disintegrate immediately. But a nice fresh bait. A shrimp. How about a shrimp? We all know snappers love shrimp. And I'll tell you a little trick. When those snappers sometimes stop biting and you can't get them to bite, take a shrimp, peel it, rip the head off so you have nothing but the meat. And take that little beautiful succulent piece of meat and just thread it all over the hook, okay? And now feed that out in your chunk slick, in your chum slick. Yellowtails love it because it's so soft and subtle, they can't resist it. But that's a different seminar altogether. So getting back to this, a jig head. Why do I fish this jig head? Because when I put this in the water, I'm fishing with my bail open, and I am slowly feeding this out, constantly. I'm constantly feeding this out. How fast do I feed it out? At the same speed that my chum and my chunks are floating away from the boat. Why? Because if you have all of these delicious morsels flowing through the water, and suddenly there's one that's going, whoop, that's flying through them all. Does that look natural? No, not at all. So you've got to really, feed that out at the same speed as that chum and the chunks are flowing. Remember too, if you have a lot of current, and if you don't feed that out fast enough, what happens to your bait? The current pulls it up toward the surface. So now you have all of this chum and these chunks flowing behind the boat, and you have one bait that's way up there. Again, does not look natural. So this jig head, by fishing in that manner, you can literally, I guess you could say you could customize your approach. You can customize your approach based on the situation that you're facing. You can keep feeding it out, keep feeding it out, keep feeding it out, get it out there a ways, get it out there 200 feet, whatever it is, then wind it back in, put on a fresh piece of bait, feed it back out again. Wind it back in, feed it back out again. You're covering that whole water column with that fresh chunk, okay? However, remember when I said that these jigs, there's thousands of them out there, the hook size is really important. You can buy these jigs with lots of different hook sizes. If you buy this jig with a tiny little hook designed for freshwater crappie, no good, okay? So make sure that you get an adequate size hook on that jig head that you're gonna use. This, like I said, yellowtail rod, but everything will eat this bait. There's mangrove snappers in the slick, they're gonna eat the bait. Mutton snappers in the slick, they're gonna eat the bait. You can't decide what eats your bait. When you can decide what eats your bait, you've really achieved a whole new level of fishing. You really have, and I can tell you, it's not gonna happen. Remember, all of that chum and the chunks are attracting all of this attention and bringing the reef to life, okay? They really are, so everything is going to be active. Everything is gonna be biting. You can't select what particular fish eats your bait. So you've gotta be ready for everything. Your line also, remember when I said I'm fishing a long leader, 12 to 15 feet, sometimes 25 feet. There's another really important reason for that. Not only stealth, okay? Every single time I've got this habit. After every fish, probably not even after every fish, every single time I reel up my line, I'm constantly grabbing the line and running it between my fingertips. Anybody else do that? Okay, what are we feeling for? For nicks and frays and little breaks, because let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. If you're that guy who says, oh, I feel a little lick, but a little nick or an abrasion. Oh, but it's okay. It's okay. I can get, I'll deal with it after the next time. There is no next time because you're going to lose a good quality fish. And you don't know when you get that bite and you come tight and you start reeling and suddenly that rod bends double over and the line starts peeling off and it goes zing pout, and you lose that fish. That ever happen to anybody? Okay, and you lose that fish. You don't know what it was. It could have been a 2-pound yellowtail, or it could have been a 12-pound mutton snapper. You'll never know what that is. So by fishing a very long leader, whenever you feel any abrasions, any nicks, anything that could potentially fail, cut it off. You don't have to re-rig. You don't have to grab a spool of line and re-rig. All you do is just cut off 12 inches and retie your jig head on, or retie your hook on, or whatever it is that you're fishing. Okay, it's a small detail, but it's going to make a big difference. And when that one fish can change the whole day, I want to make sure that I'm ready for every fish. So as I'm feeding this out for yellowtails and for other snapper, I want to maximize my time on the water. Okay, you may go out, set up on a reef or on a wreck, and you're fishing that one rod. You're feeding out that bait for the snappers. Great idea, you know, and you're having some level of success. But there's a lot of other things going on, and there's a lot of other fish that you can catch. So I like to really increase my odds by having other presentations happening simultaneously, but that I don't have to worry about. Rods that I like to say you can just set and forget, okay? One of them, and a killer for cobia. Anybody like catching cobias? Okay, cobias are great, great tasting fish, hard fighting fish, structure oriented. They're structure oriented, but a cobia doesn't generally swim down on the bottom. He's more of an upper level predator. Okay, he's higher up in the water column. And certainly when you are chumming and chunking, any cobia within a country mile are going to get a whiff of that, and they're swimming up the slick. So I like to set a cobia rod. What I do is just take, in this particular case, just a Chaos 8-foot spinning rod matched to a Daiwa size 5000 spinner. It's loaded with 20-pound mono. You can fish braid in this particular scenario. You know, it's completely up to you. Obviously, if you don't have an entire arsenal, well, if you don't, then buy some more rods from Marshall. But again, just a good spinner rod. You could do this with a conventional rod as well. What I like to do, you'll notice I've got a float right there, okay, about 6 feet away from my hook. No, I'm not bass fishing with a bobber, okay, it's a float. And it's designed to keep my bait up toward the surface where those cobias are gonna be. And by taking this float and by putting a live bait on this circle hook, and we'll talk more about the rig itself in a second, and with this 8-foot rod, the reason I have an 8-foot rod is so I can whiz this way out behind the boat. And I put it way back there, way back there. And then I take this 8-foot rod and I put it up on the hardtop on my CV in the rocket launcher. And because it's so high, being an 8-foot rod, it's way up there, it's way over our heads. So it doesn't interfere with anything that we're doing as we're feeding out those baits or we're fishing on the bottom. It's not interfering. We set it and forget it. And we just leave that rod up there. And not every trip are you gonna get bit, but certainly is gonna be nice when that 30-pound cobia eats that bait on that float and that rod just doubles over. You would have never caught that fish if you didn't do this, okay? So it's important to add these other rods into the arsenal. Again, in this particular case, 40-pound diamond presentation fluorocarbon to a 5.0 VMC tournament inline circle hook. Okay, how do I decide what size hook I'm fishing? It's, you know, which is a big, big factor. How do I decide? You know, remember that today's hooks are thinner and stronger than they've ever been before. It's the same with swivels. These little, that's a 120-pound swivel, and it's tiny. Okay, it's tiny. The days of all this big, bulky tackle are gone. Everything is now more streamlined, more sensitive. It's smaller, it's stronger. Okay, so I base my hook size, first of all, on a good quality hook. Again, I fish VMC hooks across the board. There's some other good quality brands out there as well. Stay away from that Kmart Blue Light Special stuff. Okay, fish a good quality hook, something that's not going to straighten out on you. I base my hook size on the bait size and on the size of the fish that I may potentially catch. On this rod, I like to fish a grunt. I like to fish a grunt because cobias love those grunts. A grunt or a pinfish, something that I caught on the bottom with the spinning rod, with the sabiki when I just started fishing. Remember we were talking about that? Okay, it all comes together. Okay, those baits were in my bait well that I caught prior to fishing. I take one of them, like I said, like a pinfish or a grunt. I'll stick them on this 5/0 circle hook, flip it out way back there, stick it in the rod holder, and just wait. Like I said, you're not going to catch a fish on here every time, but when you do, it's certainly going to be worth it. You're going to get cut off every now and then because guess what else is going to eat that bait? Kingfish. But you know what? Oh well. Okay, I'll take it. Okay, you could put a little piece of wire, but I don't want to do that because I'm not trying, I'm not targeting those toothy fish. So an important secondary rod to fish. Now also, let me just mention this real quick here. If you're one of those guys, okay, that goes out with this kind of tackle right here, all right, broken tips, you're reeling the rod the wrong way. Anybody ever see anybody do this? You guys know exactly what I'm talking about, right? You've all seen that guy who's done this. If this is gonna be you, you're never gonna be successful on the water, okay? I joke about this, and I joke about this tackle because I see people doing it all the time, and I'm like, dude, what are you doing? You're killing me, okay? Right, I mean, they don't have a tip on the rod, they're not holding the rod right. Of course they're not gonna catch anything. They're never gonna catch anything of any substance, anything quality-wise. It's gonna be tackle failure every time. I joke about it, but it's true. You've got to make sure that your gear is quality. Okay, whatever it is, you're fishing the best gear that you can and that you take care of it. It's so important that you take care of your gear. You take care of your gear, it's going to take care of you. Okay, remember that. So we're feeding out that bait. I'm catching yellowtail snappers. There could be mutton snappers. There could be mangrove snappers mixed in. I've got my cobia rod out there, and this is really, I'm kind of like painting this picture of a nighttime scenario because I like to refish out here for yellowtails and mangroves at night. Why? Because there's so much less boat traffic at night, right? And it's a little bit cooler, it's not as bright, the fish aren't spooked by all the divers. You get one of these dive boats to go out here and they throw 12 snorkelers in the water or 12 divers in the water. What do you think all those snappers are doing? They're gone. They're so gone, and I guarantee the ones that aren't gone are hiding. They're shit scared, okay? They don't know what's going on in the water column. It's just not natural at all. At night, they have an opportunity to really calm down a little bit and to get back into that feeding mode. So another thing that I'm gonna do, another rod that I deploy at the same time. I've got my bait up on the surface, I've got a rod in my hand, and now I'm gonna drop a bait right to the bottom. And I'm gonna fish a larger bait right on the bottom. Because remember when we're reef fishing, I'm not just targeting that one fish, that one yellowtail snapper or just a mangrove snapper. I'm targeting everything that's around that reef and that wreck. And I'm multitasking. I'm fishing multiple rods. I'm focused. I'm not out there to party and drink beer and eat public subs. Okay, I'm not. There's other places to do that. Okay, how about them dolphins? Anyhow, right? I'm out there to fish. I really am, and I'm focused on it, and I want to make the most of it. I want to be that guy that comes back every trip, or I am that guy, and I say, whatever the outcome of this trip was, I did the best that I could. I went out there, and I did the best that I could across the board, and sometimes it pays off, and sometimes it doesn't. Nevertheless, now I'll fish a bait right on the bottom, and I want to talk to you a little bit about this rig. So this is an 8-foot rod, okay? Of course, a Chaos rod rated for 20 to 40 pound line. It's a pretty beefy rod, very, very, very light. I think you'll agree, even if you fish this in your hands, okay, that it's relatively light. Yeah. It's a graphite rod with an aluminum reel, okay, so it's super light, certainly not as light as that other rod, but a different animal altogether, nonetheless, okay? And what I do with this is I again have, see if we can do this way. Okay, if you'll do me a favor, just hold that hook for me right there. So I've got a sliding sinker rig. That's what this is called, a sliding sinker rig. There is a bank sinker, which depending on the depth, depending on the bait, that bank sinker right here could be anywhere from 6 to 16 ounces. I like the heavier, the better. Okay, and not ridiculously heavy, but I want my bait sitting on the bottom. So the bigger the bank sinker, the better. Also, I have it on a sliding rig. You'll notice here, it slides. So this way, that bait has maximum freedom. And when a fish, like a big grouper, eats that bait, that live bait, the grunt, because I would never fish a juvenile yellowtail snapper, okay? So when that grouper eats that grunt on the bottom, he doesn't feel the tension of this sinker, okay? And yeah, but there's a reason for that, and I'm gonna get to it. So my whole rig, you'll notice that I have my sinker tied on with 20-pound test. However, my entire rig is 50-pound test. So why do I have the sinker tied on with 20-pound test if the whole rig is 50-pound test? For that exact reason, because it's easy to break the sinker off if the sinker gets hung in the bottom. And I don't lose my fish and I don't lose my entire rig. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. You can't do this with a 3-way swivel because it doesn't slide. So what I do is just take a barrel swivel. You can see there's just a little barrel swivel right there. And I put it right on my main line before I tie on another barrel swivel. So it slides right up and down the line. I've got a long leader, 12 to 15 feet, okay, before I get to a large hook. And I say large because I'm typically fishing a large grunt on the bottom with this. So it might be a 7/0 J hook, it may be a circle hook. Remember, here on the East Coast and on the Atlantic, we are permitted to fish with either J hooks or circle hooks when we're reef and wreck fishing. In the Gulf of Mexico, you have to fish with a circle hook. And anyone who is afraid of fishing with circle hooks, because I can tell you that there was a day when I went, that's a hook. It's a J. It's shaped like a J. That's a hook. And then somebody put a circle hook in my hand. I went like this. And I went, that's not a hook. Okay, that's somebody's crazy idea of some stupid shape for a hook that'll never work. Nowadays, rarely will you ever even see me fish with a J hook. I'll fish with circle hooks across the board. They're so effective, they're so easy to fish, and at the end of the day, you're going to catch more fishing circle hooks than you would fishing J hooks. So if you're hesitant to fish circle hooks, don't be. Put that thought out of your mind and fish those circle hooks. Another really cool reason, or another good thing that you can do with this same outfit, with this rig, when you are drifting out in the deep, 200 feet, 150 feet, 300 feet, whatever it is, you can drop this rig to the bottom with a live bait or even a dead bait. And as you're drifting along, or even if you're anchored and there's a lot of current, but certainly when you're drifting, the same thing. Keep your thumb on the spool and just slowly feed out line. And you're going to achieve a really stealthy, natural presentation. In this particular case, Daiwa Saltiga size 50H loaded with 30-pound diamond braid, plenty of line capacity. You're not going to break that braid. However, on top of that braid, I've got a top shot of monofilament. Okay, a 50-pound monofilament on top of the 30-pound braid. You need that top shot. You need that elasticity because there's no stretch in the braid. And if something doesn't give, the hook may tear right out of that fish's mouth. So you need something that has a little elasticity. And like I said, that top shot is really, really important. How do you connect the top shot to the braid? What's the best knot? God, I love you guys. Okay, an FG knot. If you're not sure how to tie that, a uni to uni will work as well. There's lots of different knots out there. Learn them. But nevertheless, so we're back to our yellowtail scenario. I'm standing there, I've got the spinning rod in my hand, I'm feeding a bait out, okay? I've got my cobia rod up on top with a bait up on the surface. I take this rod and I drop it right to the bottom, okay? With a circle hook, could be a J hook, and I drop it right to the bottom with an adequate size lead, depending on the conditions that I'm facing. Lock it up and put it right in the rod holder, up in the bow or somewhere where it's out of your way. So you could be going out there and you're fishing one bait, I'm fishing 3 baits. I'm covering a lot more of the water column than you are. And you know what? I may get that bite on the bottom bait, I may get those bites on the top bait, or I may get those bites feeding it out by hand, or any combination thereof. okay? So you've got to try and cover as much of the water column as you possibly can. Another thing, okay, this is really probably the most easiest and effective bottom fishing rig of all time. Okay, if you're just getting to Florida, the couple people that I talked to, and you want to catch some fish, you need to learn how to fish and how to tie the high-low rig. Okay, the high-low rig. That's all that this is. It is one hook that is high. If you will notice up here, let me put out a little bit of line. This is a 7-foot Chaos rod, rated for 15 to 30 pound line. It's a composite rod. It's got a nice soft tip, really, really sensitive. However, it's got some fiberglass in there as well, some glass, sea glass, whatever kind of glass they make these rods out of. So it's got plenty of backbone also, okay? But again, a very soft tip, so really, really sensitive. And you can see there's a hook. That's right up there, and there's another hook that's right here, and I'll put the sinker right on the bottom so you kind of give you an idea. One bait is about 12 inches off the bottom, and one bait might be 4 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet off the bottom, okay? You're gonna catch pretty much everything that swims on or near the bottom. You'll catch on a high-low rig. Vermilion snappers, all sorts of different snappers, African pompanos, porgies. Okay, there's a lot of nice porgies out here that you'll catch on these high-low rigs. I tie a simple dropper loop right in the rig. You can see there's very little hardware on my rig altogether. The only hardware I have, I've got one little barrel swivel right there, but that's it. Other than that, it's stealthy. There's just a little dropper loop right there, another dropper loop. Depending on the size of the fish that I'm targeting and the bait that I'm fishing, it could be anywhere from a 3-0 to a 5-0 circle hook, okay? And you can fish this rig in anywhere from 30 to 300 feet of water. It is so simple, so versatile. You simply put 2 pieces of bait on there, you drop it to the bottom, you wait for the rod tip to bend over, you reel your fish up. Pretty much that simple, okay? And again, very, very effective for a wide array of different species. This time of the year, right now, there's a lot of vermilion snappers offshore, and anywhere from around 320 to 380. Okay, you can even catch a speaker here. Got it. Okay. So if you're going to do anything at all, make sure you've got a high-low rig ready to go at all times. One other rig that I want to show you that's also really important. You know, we talked a little bit before about amberjacks. In May and June, our wrecks out here are loaded in AJs. You can catch amberjack any day of the year. Okay, not to say you can't catch an amberjack any day of the year, you can. But certainly in the spring, our wrecks out here, especially the deeper wrecks past or deeper than 200 feet, are loaded in big AJs. Some of these things, you know, we call them reef donkeys, okay, because it feels like you're reeling in a donkey, okay? Some of these things are 50, 60 pounds, even larger. You can't stop them. You ever try and stop a 50-pound amberjack on a little light spinner? Not gonna happen, okay? It literally is not gonna happen. So when we go and specifically target the amberjack, or when I know there might be some amberjack around, I'm making sure that I've got a heavier outfit. This is a 7-foot Chaos rod rated for 30 to 60 pound line. It's a little bit of a beefier blank. It's a heavier rod than the one that I just showed you with that soft little tip where I'm looking to detect a strike. You don't need to detect a strike with an amberjack, okay? Trust me, you know when a 50-pound amberjack eats your bait. You know it. There's no question. If you don't know it, well, you do. All right, we'll just leave it at that. You know it. Star drag reel, you can fish a lever drag reel, whatever you have, okay? Wide variety of reels. Some people fish, 50s, when they go out AJ fishing, okay? However, again, today's reels, they're smaller, they're lighter, and they've got so much drag pressure, their maximum drag on the reels is so much greater than it used to be on these smaller products. In this particular case, a Daiwa black and gold, I've got it loaded with 60-pound diamond braid. I've beefed it up because I know that as soon as I hook that 50-pound AJ, he's taking me right back into the wreck. He's turning his head, he's looking at that wreck, and he's going right back there. And if I can't get on my knees, literally, on my knees on a boat and lean this against the rail and just hold on and just slam the brakes on that fish, I'm gonna lose them. So you need something that's heavier, something that has more stopping power. If you seriously wanna stop those AJs, you need some serious tackle. You know, so many guys, who's ever busted off an AJ? Okay, if you haven't, it's because you haven't hooked one yet. Okay, everybody busts off AJs. You can't stop these things. They're so damn strong. It's incredible. On top of my 60-pound diamond braid, I've got an 80-pound top shot. 80-pound diamond presentation top shot. I've switched up my rig a little bit. This is called a sliding sinker rig, a fish finder rig. Remember that sliding sinker rig I showed you before? This is, you know, similar. However, instead of having that dropper loop, this egg sinker is literally just right on the line itself. So the egg sinker slides. This egg sinker, you know, the size of this egg sinker is gonna vary. I like them heavy because I want to be able to control what depth that bait is at. So that egg sinker may be anywhere from 6 to 16 ounces, again, depending on current, depending on the bait, depending on the depth of water. You know, where am I reading those AJs on my Furuno sounder? If I see blobs and, you know, marks of fish and they're right off the bottom in 260, I'm gonna fish a bigger lead because I need to get that bait deeper. If I see them, you know, suspended 100 feet off the wreck, I could probably get away with a little bit of a lighter lead. From there, there's just a little barrel swivel, and then it's 100-pound leader, okay? 12 to 15 feet of diamond presentation, 100-pound fluorocarbon. This is heavy stuff, people, but you need it to slam the brakes on these amberjacks. 9.0 inline circle hook. I beefed up the size of the hook because I know these AJs, man, they'll straighten hooks left and right. So you need a big, strong hook. Plus, I'm fishing a big bait, a big live goggle eye, or what's a great bait for AJs? Big mullet. Right now, a big mullet, okay? Again, you're fishing a larger bait. You've beefed up your tackle across the board, something with a lot of drag pressure. Drop this down, that AJ, you're gonna know because it's gonna feel like somebody took this hook and suddenly put a pallet full of bricks on the hook, okay? Just slam the drag down as tight as you can and just hold on. Just hold on. And if you make it through the first 30 seconds, you'll land the fish if it doesn't get eaten by a shark, because a lot of AJs get eaten by sharks. If you can't make it past the first 30 seconds, or if you bust them off, it's gonna be in that first 30-second period. So, yeah, that's for sure. So a couple other things to talk about here. And again, it's impossible to discuss all of the different aspects of reef and wreck fishing around the entire state of Florida because there's so many different types of bottom. Okay, there's so many different types of reef. You know, when we fish way out in the Gulf, we fish this stuff called plate coral. And it literally, it's reef, but the coral is not what you picture. When you picture coral, you're thinking Florida Keys, this nice brain coral and these floral kind of shapes and things to that nature. Way out in the Gulf of Mexico, 100+ miles offshore, you don't have that kind of coral. You have plate coral, which literally looks like big scales, we'll say kind of on a tarpon, but the size of a paper plate. Giant, flat pieces of coral, really weird stuff. And on top of this coral is this grass that grows, these big kelp leaves, very much like you would picture kelp from the West Coast. The same stuff grows on this plate coral way out there in the Gulf. How we fish out there is completely different than how we fish for yellowtails or other snappers in the Bahamas, because we don't have the sharks that you have in the Bahamas. Because keep in mind, if you go to the Bahamas and put a 25-pound block of chum in the water, and you start throwing scoops of fresh bonita, that's all bloody, guess what's gonna happen? You will catch nothing, because, unless you want to catch sharks, because you're gonna attract every shark within 5 square miles, if not further. So you can't fish the same way out there. And again, in the Gulf, we're not chumming at all. You're generally drifting or sometimes anchored, depending on where you are, way offshore out there. On that plate coral, you're always drifting because it's against the law to anchor on that plate coral because it's protected. So you're always drifting. So you need a rig that is designed to be able to fish over this jagged type of structure, knowing that every now and then you may get hung up. Your baits are different because you're dropping it much deeper and it needs to be a much more streamlined bait. Something like a squid that's long and slender versus a fish type bait that potentially may spin. So I'm just throwing a couple examples out there that there's so much to learn, and there's so many different variables when it comes to reef and rec fishing that you couldn't possibly learn everything, in 1 hour. We're just scratching the surface. We really are. We're literally just scratching the surface, okay? Some of the other things, that I want to stress that are really important, as I mentioned, is the bait. I cannot stress this enough, how important fresh bait is when you are reef and rec fishing for any species. The chum, how important it is that you do have plenty of chum because you don't know, how much you're going to go through. Keep an open mind. You don't know when the conditions are going to be right for you to go out here and fish that 30-foot reef, the little patches in 30 feet of water, or you're fishing 60 or 90 or rec fishing in 260 feet of water and drifting across the flats out there. So remember that you've got to keep an open mind. Remember also that the fish, even though that they relate to the structure, mutton snappers especially, they'll swim and roam over sandy bottom, okay, open bottom. You can drift sandy bottom right out here at 120 feet of water where it's just sand, but there's reef nearby. There's reef shallower than that, but they will travel across open bottom, open sandy bottom, and you can drift right across that sand for them, okay? The terminal tackle and your connections, you've got to be bulletproof. There was recently a kayak tournament. There are a lot of kayaks, kayak fishermen locally. There was recently a kayak tournament, and they had some really exceptional catches this year during that recent tournament, the Extreme Kayak Fishing Tournament, it's called. They caught some beautiful African pompano. I don't remember how large, but easily 40 pounds, 50 pounds, okay? He's indicating somewhere, definitely in that size range. Okay, huge African pompanos. If these guys were not ready for fish of that caliber, if they weren't good anglers, and they knew the limits of their tackle, they would have never been able to land those quality fish. So you've got to be ready. And when I say the limits of your tackle, anybody ever get hung up in the bottom? No. Right? Okay, stupid question. We've all gotten hung up in the bottom. You know what I do when I get hung up in the bottom? I do everything that I can to try and get out of the bottom. But it reaches a certain point where you go, shit, I'm not getting out, man. I'm hung. Okay, I'm stuck. I am not getting this rig out of the bottom. Okay, you've realized that. You've tried everything. You can't do it. You can't get the rig out of the bottom. What some people might do is just lock it up. It doesn't matter what rod I grab here. Okay. They may just take, like he said, take a couple wraps, wrap it around the reel, wrap it around a cleat, whatever it is that they do, and they try and just bust that out of the bottom without ripping the line, wrapping it around their palms or something. So what I do is I'll get hung in the bottom and I will tighten my drag as tight as I can, and you can put a lot of drag pressure on here. And this applies with any rod or reel, within reason. And I'll tighten it and I'll tighten it, and I'm holding it and holding it, and I'm keeping my finger right on the line and right on the spool, and I'm feeling with every inch of my body, I could feel it getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and you guys know exactly what I'm talking about, right? And I feel that pressure, and it pop, and it breaks right there. Now I've built that muscle memory of knowing where that breaking point is in my tackle. Okay, I know how far I can push my tackle before it breaks, before something fails. Then as soon as it breaks, first thing I do when I reel that up, what broke? I want to see what broke. Did the hook straighten out? Did the swivel break? Did the FG knot fail? Okay, what broke? Okay, and I study that. And so this way I can improve on that. I know if my weak link is always going to be, the knot going to the swivel, then I need to improve that knot, or I need to improve that connection, or come up with an alternative for it. And when I mention this in the beginning of the seminar, maybe I take it a little bit too deep. Maybe I do, maybe I don't, but that's just what I do. okay? I really try and get into the intricacies of it all and to the details of it all, because successful fishing in South Florida, I don't care what you are fishing for, is all about the details, okay? May it be kite fishing, may it be trolling for dolphin. Listen, a blind squirrel can find a nut any day of the week. Happens to everybody. I've seen it myself. I see these yo-yos coming back to the dock. I may have had a terrible day. They're holding up a 50-pound wahoo. Woo! And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? All right? You know, I'm like, seriously? It happens, okay? Anybody can go out there and get lucky, you know, and I like luck. Luck is good, but I'd rather be consistent, you know? I'd really rather be consistent. And that's what Florida fishing is all about. If you want to be successful, if you want to take your game to the next level, forget reef and rec fishing. Like I said earlier, it applies for everything, all the way through to catching bait, all the way through to daytime sword fishing and everything in between. It's about the details. Plus, you've heard me use this expression a couple times in this seminar. I've said premature tackle failure. Anybody ever lose a fish because of premature tackle failure? The answer is yes, we all have. A knot failed, there was a fray in the line, your drag was set too tight. One of a million different things could have happened. The braid busted, as I mentioned, because it was damaged. Lots of different scenarios where premature tackle failure entered the equation. We have to eliminate that. We have to eliminate that out of the equation. We also have to eliminate premature, or I should say angler failure. Anybody ever lose a fish because they took a gaff and they were trying to gaff the fish, and before they knew it, they busted the fish off on the end of the gaff? Okay, one scenario. Or a million different things. You're trying to flip a fish up and you're holding its head out of the water, and next thing you know, the line breaks. I mean, again, so many different things, so many different scenarios that I can mention. If we together collectively, or even as individuals, if we eliminate tackle failure and angler failure from the equation, you're going to catch 90% more fish. Okay, I promise you, you're going to catch 90% more fish. You're not going to catch every one of them, because you're going to lose a lot of fish, you know, or you're going to lose some fish. We don't catch every one of them. It's just part of the game. But you're not going to lose them for careless reasons. Slow down. You know, slow down. I know it's exciting. You're hooked up to a big fish, but slow down. Relax. Finesse. I can't stress this enough. You know, that fish took me 40 minutes. Finesse. Okay, finesse. Take your time. He's not going anywhere. He's on the end of your line. Okay, you put too much pressure on him, potentially you're going to bust that fish off. You don't put enough pressure on him, you'll never land him, because you're not tiring that fish out. So you have to find that balance, and the only way to find that balance is with experience and with time spent on the water, like we had said earlier, okay? Get to know your tackle, get to know your area, and you're gonna get out of it what you put into it, as I mentioned earlier. If you're that guy that wants to go reef fishing and stops and buys a box of squid and a box of chum, have fun. Don't expect to catch much. If you're the guy that says, hey man, I'm going out this weekend, I want to go out and load up on some fresh mullet and, you know, make sure I've got plenty of chum and study my chart plotter and know where I'm going and make sure I'm in the right position and make sure my gear's, you know, top notch, you're going to catch more. You are going to catch more. You really are. Back to the reef and rec fishing real quick here. You know, there's lots of other fish, as I mentioned earlier. We've got all of those snappers, all of the groupers, triggerfish, you know, and I kind of joke about triggerfish because one man's junk is another man's treasure. Okay? They are delicious, you know, and in the Gulf of Mexico, they're highly targeted. They've closed seasons completely and said triggerfish are completely off limits. You can't even catch one, or I should say keep one. You can't even keep one. Okay, that's how treasured they are. It really is a great eating fish, so don't discount triggerfish by any means. But there's so many other fish out there between the groupers, the African pompanos, like I said, all of the different jack species, the pelagic predators higher up in the water column. You know, that's one of the greatest things about fishing down here in Florida is the versatility, the assortment of different species that we encounter, how every day is different. You know, it really is incredible. Our reef lines, we're fortunate, but again, make no mistake, if you go out here and go reef fishing and you are not successful, sometimes it isn't your fault. You can't catch fish that aren't there, okay, no matter who you are. There has to be fish there in order for you to catch them. The conditions have to be right, and if they're not right, don't be afraid to modify your approach. Don't be afraid to go deeper or shallower. Don't be afraid to burn some fuel. There's some really good wrecks north of us up off of Boynton. There's good reef up there. A lot of cobias caught up there, a lot more than down here. Okay, certainly there's some really good spots down south. Anybody ever fished the Tenneco Towers? You ever hear of that spot down off Hollywood? Okay, really cool reef spot down there. Very easy to find, loaded with just a wide variety of different species, all the way on up to Goliath grouper that will eat your snappers, you know, and groupers off that wreck. There are a lot of Goliath grouper even on our wrecks. I talk to a lot of the divers who tell me that they see them all over the place. So, you know, that's becoming a little bit of a bigger problem, or actually a problem, because they're eating a lot of the fish that we hook and a lot of the fish that you could potentially catch. But again, a lot of variety, a lot of versatility, a lot of options. Bahamas, the reef fishing is incredible. Okay, phenomenal yellowtail fishing, but it's not, you know, Bimini, 48, 50 miles, depending what inlet you come out of. It's a hop, skip, and jump, so to speak. Great mutton fishing, great yellowtail fishing, but it's not right out front. You got to travel south usually to really get into a good bite. Okay, down to Gunner, Cat, you know, you got to get away from Bimini. Why? Because again, there's a lot of pressure right out front of Bimini right there as well. The Keys we touched on a little bit. I don't know, if I died and went to heaven, my heaven would probably be the Florida Keys, because it is such an extraordinary world-class fishery across the board. And the reef fishing there is phenomenal. It really is. There's so many different opportunities, but you got to get dialed in.